As you can see, I have Richard Dawkins on my screen. He had this debate a while back with Cardinal George Pell. He's a member of the Catholic Church. I think he's a cardinal over all of Australia at the time, anyways. Something like that. He's very, very high up. And in addition to that, Cardinal Pell was caught up in one of those child mistreatment scandals, with the Catholic Church. Not fantastic. That was long after this debate took place. This debate happened 9 years ago, actually, 2014. It's really fascinating to go back and watch, though I do have to put an obligatory, not really a fan of Richard Dawkins. I feel like he's not great on trans issues, LGBT issues generally. I'm just not a fan of him at all, honestly. But like I said, it's valuable to go back and listen to what the talking points were back then and things like that. So without further ado, let's give this debate a listen, see what he had to say. And while we do, we are going to play some Breath of the Wild. All right, let's give this a listen.
But the trouble, well, there are many troubles with Richard's teachings. But
they're not teachings. They're just debunking your nonsense, George.
A fundamental one is that he dumbs down God and he soups up nothing.
What? That makes no sense. He dumbs down God and soups up nothing? Again, this dude shouldn't be up here. The things that he says are nonsensical. Now, if I were being charitable, I suppose I could interpret that to mean nothing started the universe, and Richard Dawkins talks about that in like his books and his lectures and stuff, and Pell talks about God creating the universe.
He continually talks as though God is some sort of upmarket figure within space and time. Now, from 450, 500 BC, where with the Greek philosophers, God is...
450, 500 BC. Yeah, okay. So there were some Greek philosophers in the area, I suppose, because the Greeks controlled it until, I think, 300 BCE.
Outside space and time, God is necessary, self-sufficient, uncaused, unconditioned. That's the hypothesis you've got to wrestle with.
Not really. It's thousands of years old and doesn't factor into quantum physics or any other type of astrophysics or whatever in any way.
The second thing is that Krauss says nothing about the Big Bang coming out of nothing.
He's talking about Lawrence Krauss. Dawkins brought up Lawrence Krauss, a physicist. Not a fan of Lawrence Krauss either, really, that much. And Krauss has this controversial position that the Big Bang came out of nothing, absolutely nothing. Most people think that there was a primordial set of rules or elements of some sort to have created the Big Bang in the first place, but who knows?
Admittedly, he comes clean on about 6 pages from the end of his book, and I don't know whether Richard has read it that far because he gave it a foreword. What he says is what Richard is describing as nothing is a sort of a mixture of particles and perhaps a vacuum with electromagnetic forces working on it. That's what Krauss is talking about under the heading of nothing. And there's a very good review of this in the New York Times, not a pro-religious paper at all, where Krauss is absolutely denied and demolished, although especially by his supporters claiming that he says things come out of nothing. He doesn't say that.
It's a matter. You can quickly respond to that.
No, I think he does. I mean, like I said, that's his big controversial idea that he wrote about in the book. He says it came out of nothing, literally nothing. And as Richard tried to explain it in a previous part, when antimatter and matter meet, they gobble each other up and disappear. And Krauss's... the crude explanation of what Lawrence Krauss described for how the Big Bang came to be was that process happened in reverse. Is he correct? Who knows? I don't even really like the guy, let alone understand. Like, I have no idea. I have no way to know if what he said is true or any of that. So it's just pure speculation. And I don't understand why George Pell is leaning into this. Like, you're a fool. Like, you should have seen this for what it is. Like, I have the best explanation. No, you don't. You have a piss-poor explanation that means nothing.
You can dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
Okay, well, once again, evidence that this guy has no clue what he's talking about, has no experience in physics or astrophysics or anything, and thinks that he's way more intelligent than he actually is.
Well, can I put that to you as a question? Is it equally feasible, since you can't prove the existence of God, that the nothing you're talking about is in fact some creative force?
If you talk about a God who is a creative intelligence, then that is something very complicated and very improbable, and something that requires explaining in its own right. The nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about, whether or not it's what a naive person would conceive as nothing or what a sophisticated physicist would consider to be nothing, it is going to be something much, much simpler than a creative intelligence. We are struggling, we're all struggling, scientists are struggling, to explain how we get the fantastic order and complexity of the universe out of very simple and therefore easy to understand, easy to explain beginnings. Lawrence Krauss calls the substrate of his explanation nothing. It's possible to dispute whether nothing is quite the right word, but whatever it is very, very simple, and therefore is a worthy premise for an explanation. Whereas a God, a creative intelligence, is not a worthy substrate for an explanation because it is already something very complicated. And it's no good invoking Thomas Aquinas and saying that God is defined as outside time and space. That's just a cop-out. That's just an evasion of the responsibility to explain. That's just setting out what you want to prove before you've even started.
Okay.
And it's really like that whole Thomas Aquinas thing about God being like outside of space and time and all that stuff. It's inevitably going to end in disaster for Christians because it's really, in its most basic form, a God of the gaps fallacy. Right? We don't know what is outside of space and time. But we might one day. We might. And when we discover that, you're going to be forced to move to the position of God exists somewhere else. In our hearts, maybe. I have no idea where these people would say he exists after being unequivocally proven wrong on that one. You're going to have to keep moving back further and further, changing your position as science moves forward. That's just how it's going to work.
Let's move on to a question. Let's move on to a question on evolution for Cardinal Peltz from Joe Blades.
I believe evolution. I think that Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist. He's very well-versed on this subject.
As a young Catholic scientist, I'd like to ask the Cardinal to clarify the Roman Catholic Church's position on evolution and comment on whether the dichotomy between science and religion is in fact real.
Well, science and religion are two different activities, and in the Catholic Church, you can believe to some extent what you like about evolution. I think Darwin made a great contribution. I remember talking with Julius Kornberg, a very distinguished biologist, and he's worked with ants for years And he said, you know, he's managed to change them by changing the conditions. But there are a number of things that evolution doesn't explain.
It doesn't explain a ton of stuff, of course. What is he talking about? Does evolution set out to explain everything? This is news to me.
Darwin realised that. Darwin was a theist.
Okay, I think that's completely irrelevant. I don't care if he's a theist or not.
Because he said he couldn't believe that the immense cosmos and all the beautiful things in the world came about either by chance or out of necessity.
Now, let me tell you a little trick that Pell likes to pull throughout the entirety of this debate. I'll point it out every time he does it. He likes to quote page numbers and paragraphs and stuff that are completely made up. Things that were never said, things that Dawkins didn't say, things that Darwin didn't say, just fabricates it because it gives him an edge in the debate. And it's kind of an underhanded, dirty tactic, honestly.
He said, I have to be ranked as a theist. Now,
that's just not true.
Excuse me.
It's just plain not true.
It's on page 92 of his autobiography.
Dude, I'm saying he's just quoting things that are simply made up.
Go and have a look.
And who's going to fact check that right now? We can't fact check that, right? We have no way to get in there and look because nobody has a copy of this book right now. So it's chalked up as a W for this guy, naturally. This is a slimy debate tactic in my mind.
So, can I just bring you, in a sense, to the point of the question? Do you accept that humans evolved from apes?
Yeah, probably. From Neanderthals, yes. Whether...
Okay.
No. Neanderthals, first of all, it's pronounced Neanderthals, actually. It was named after a cave in the area. Neanderthals were a subspecies that coexisted with Homo sapiens until they were genocided by Homo sapiens. There was some interbreeding. That's why we have some Neanderthal DNA. But, yeah, did not end well for the Neanderthals. They were not humans.
From Neanderthals?
Probably.
Why from Neanderthals?
Well, who else would you suggest?
Well, there is an entire lineage of human evolution that you can follow. Homo erectus, and then my favorite Homo, which is Homo heidelbergensis. I am the biggest fan of that Homo ever. It's just, this guy obviously has no clue what he's talking about right now, at all. He shouldn't be talking on this subject if he doesn't know it. Here's one thing I don't like about Dawkins also. I understand Pell is kind of a smug ass. Dawkins is definitely acting really smug here, right? Like he's an idiot. I mean, he is an idiot, to be fair. But you don't have to treat people like that. You know why it's a bad idea to treat people like an idiot in a debate? First of all, because you look like an asshole. I just can't stand to see it happen. And second, because Pell is acting as an analog for everybody watching right now. Anyone who agrees with Pell views themselves in his shoes. So any smug, self-satisfactory responses or reactions Dawkins gives to Pell are being transferred onto the people listening right now. If you're in a debate or a conversation or whatever, don't act like a smug, self-centered asshole. It is the worst possible idea you could have to do that.
Who else would you suggest?
Be kind. He doesn't know the answer. So kindly explain it to him and say, place yourself in a position that's equal to his. Say, yeah, I remember when I found this out. It blew me away. Like, I didn't know this either. You don't know this. I didn't know this. I learned it, and now you're learning it, you know? That's how I build my debate tactics out. Of course, I don't debate very often, but... Well, I do debate very often. It's just not public. I debate my wife a lot and stuff like that, so because we disagree on some things from time to time. Anyways, it's just a bad idea to do what Richard Dawkins is doing. It's simply petty and a way to make himself feel better, probably. He probably feels like he's been slighted by this guy, and he wants to put him in his place, so he's going to act smug and self-satisfied in response. Keep your emotions under control in a debate. That is first and foremost. Rule number 1.
Neanderthals were our cousins. We're not descended from them. And we're both descended from...
Are these extant cousins?
These living cousins is what that means.
Where will I find a Neanderthal today if they're my cousins?
They're not extant, they're extinct.
Exactly, that's my point.
Your point is that because they're not... that because they're extant, they can't be our cousins.
I really am not much fussed.
I.e., he has no idea what he's saying right now. I'm really not much fussed is British for I'm really not that upset. I.e., I don't know what else to say here, so I'm just going to stick a common British saying in and hope it fits. Spoiler alert, it didn't. This guy should not be in a debate. Extant means living, extinct means dead, by the way. I don't know if I clarified that.
Your point is that because they're not... that because they're extant, they can't be our cousins.
I really am not much fussed.
That's very clear.
Something in the evolutionary story seems to have come before humans. A lot of people say it's Neanderthals.
Can we say this? Humans, you accept that humans evolved from non-humans. So let me put this to you as a question. At what point in this evolutionary scale was a soul imparted to the humans from God?
Look, a soul isn't... it's not like putting a spot of gin in a tonic.
It's not? Okay. I thought it was, kind of.
The soul is the principle of life. So whenever there was a principle of life that could question, that could be open to awe, that was able to communicate, then we had the first human. Now, we...
What? I mean, I feel like there are some animal species, and certainly some proto-human species, like some of my favorite homos out there, who fall into that category, right? Like Homo heidelbergensis and Homo erectus, those types of people?
believe that the first humans developed in South Africa. I'm not
okay. Well, Africa, that's correct.
quite sure how long ago, and that all the
about 200,000 years.
Humans have developed from that. We know most about that. There aren't remains. We know most about that because of the drawings they left on the on walls and caves and that sort of thing. No such thing from Neanderthals. So we can't say exactly when there was a first human, but we have to say...
What? Well, I'm sorry. What is he saying right now? Like, all of this completely incorrect. Being human is kind of a spectrum, right? So it's hard to know exactly like, you can draw a line anywhere on that spectrum and call it human, and it would probably make sense. 100,000, 200,000, hell, maybe even 2,500, 300,000. It's so hard to tell exactly where humans started. Where if we went back in time and we grabbed one and brought him back, could he sit in to our classes and learn with our school children exactly the same as they learn? It's hard to know where that line is, but scientists largely, I think, put it at like 100,000 to 200,000.
Say, if there are humans, there must have been a first one. There might have been equal first, but if there is a progression, there's got to be first.
So are you talking about a kind of Garden of Eden scenario with an actual Adam and Eve?
Well, what Adam and Eve terms, what do they mean? Life and earth.
They do? Life and earth? I've never heard that. What is he talking about? This is nonsense. Adam and Eve mean life and earth?
It's like every man. That's a beautiful, sophisticated, a mythological account. It's not science, but it's there to tell us two or three things. First of all, that God created the world and the universe. Secondly, that the key to the whole of the universe, the really significant thing, are humans. And thirdly, it's a very sophisticated mythology to try to explain the evil and the suffering
But
of the
it isn't
world.
a literal truth. You shouldn't see it in any way as being an historical or literal truth.
It's certainly not a scientific truth, and
So it's not true, is what he's saying. Not a scientific truth means it's not true, right?
it's a religious story told for religious purposes.
And just quickly, because the Old Testament in particular is full of these kind of stories. I mean, is there a point where you distinguish between metaphor and reality? For example, Moses receiving the Ten Commandments inscribed directly by God on a mountain.
I'm not sure that the Old Testament says that God inscribed the Ten Commandments, but leaving that aside, it's
Moses was not a real person.
difficult to know how exactly that worked, but Moses was a great man. There was a great encounter with the divine. Actually, with Moses, we get the key that enables us to come together with the Greeks with reason, because Moses said, "Who will I tell the Egyptians?" And he said, "Tell that my name is I am who I am."
Okay,
And
I'm
we'll come back
going
to
to bring
that.
Richard Dawkins back in here because we've moved from...
Okay, yeah, none of this makes any sense at all. I have no idea what this guy's talking about right now.
evolution, obviously, to the biblical versions of it. Your response?
Well, I'm curious to know if Adam and Eve never existed, where did original sin come from? But I also would like to
Right? Exactly. That's good.
clarify the point about whether there ever was a first human. That's a rather difficult and puzzling question, because we know that the previous species from which we're descended is probably Homo erectus, and before that some sort of...
That's my second favorite Homo erectus. First favorite Homo is Homo heidelbergensis by far, by a mile and a half.
Australopithecine. But there never was a last Homo erectus who gave birth to the first Homo sapiens. Every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents. The process of evolution is so gradual that you can never say, aha, now suddenly we have the first human. It was always a case of just a slightly different from the previous generation. That's a scientific point, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not sure if it has theological significance, except that I think successive popes have tried to suggest that the soul did indeed get added, rather like gin to tonic, at some particular point during evolution. At some point in evolution, there was no soul, and then later there was one. So it is quite an interesting question to ask. Now we have rather a good fossil record from Africa of the descent of humans, from Australopithecines to various species of Homo, perhaps Homo habilis, perhaps Homo erectus, then archaic Homo sapiens, and then...
No shout out for my main man, Homo heidelbergensis. That's sad.
Modern Homo sapiens. At what point did the soul get injected? And what does the idea of original sin mean if Adam and Eve never existed?
I'll just quickly let you respond to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, God wasn't running around giving injections. And if
We sure about that one?
there is no first person, we're not humans.
Where did the soul come from then?
Wow, dude. Did I just get my I just got my absolutely f***ed. Wow, that's messed up. That's what I get for trying to jump a little bit too far.
The soul is
the
the
point of
principle of
evolution.
life.
But
There are animal souls.
Do
There's
jellyfish...
all living things have some principle of life. An animal has a principle of life. A human has a soul, a principle of life, which is immensely more sophisticated. We even have a voice box, which is one of the great miracles.
Okay, I think all animals have voice boxes. They just can't use them as uniquely as humans can, I believe.
So that we can communicate our thoughts to one another rather than just grunting.
I'm pleased we're not grunting tonight. Let's move along.
He has no education in this at all, and it shows dramatically to anybody who's done the most cursory, basic research into these subjects. He has no clue what he's talking about, and he's floundering terribly. He's pretending to know what he's talking about when he simply doesn't. Wow, am I just going to die again? Please don't let me die again. Okay, I'm good. Wow, that was rough. I don't know what the hell is happening right now. I would love to get out of these stupid pricker bushes. That would be great. I just want the rain to stop, damn it.
You can, by the way, don't forget you can still vote at quandavote.tv, I should say, on the question, does religious belief make the world a better place? Over 50...
I would say no, it doesn't, and I think almost everybody should agree with that, honestly. Look at Islam and the damage that it's done to society. Look at the damage that all of these other religious ideologies have done. Look at the damage Catholicism has done if you're a Protestant. And if you're a Catholic, look at the damage Protestantism has done. You can't possibly tell me that you agree that religion overall has had a net positive effect. I could hear people arguing that their religion has had a net positive effect. But I just can't figure out how anybody could say, yes, overall it has had a good effect.
15,000 viewers have already voted, and we'll check before the end of the program for the final results. Our next question for Professor Dawkins and Cardinal Pell is a video, and it comes from Kieran Dennis in Ferntree Gully, Victoria.
Yeah, I think this is taking part in Australia. I could be wrong.
Question is for George Pell. George, as a climate change skeptic, you demand a very high standard of evidence to support the hypothesis that global warming has an anthropogenic cause. My question is, why then do you not demand the same standard of evidence for the existence of God?
George Pell.
Dude, when, in 100 years, climate skeptic is going to be viewed as this grotesque, whacked out piece of shit. No one is going to have any respect for supposed climate skeptics. They'll probably blame climate skeptics for the situation that they're in 100 years, honestly.
I'm very, very happy to answer that. First of all, I'm not a skeptic about climate change. I grew up in Ballarat. The weather was always shy. I worked for years in Melbourne. If you don't like the weather in Melbourne, wait 20 minutes.
Okay, that's a stupid joke, but aside from that, that's weather, not climate.
Think of all the nonsense people like Flannery told us about years of drought here, and now we're coping with flood.
So can I just clarify that you're a skeptic about global warming leading to climate change?
I'm skeptical about the human contribution to dangerous climate change. I think that is not established.
And is...
Okay, well, you're simply wrong, good sir.
And sorry, is that because you're sceptical about scientific consensus? And is that partly driven by what scientists believe about religion?
No, got nothing to do with it. On the weather question, I go on the evidence. When you come to talk about God, that is not a scientific question. The scientists concede that. It is a question that is open, I believe, to reason. You have to reason about the facts of science. Ask whether you believe that the suggestion that, random selection...
That's not something that I have to ask. I just have to look at the data and understand how that data is put together and works. There is no, belief aspect to this. The guy's confusing belief and acceptance. I don't believe in evolution. I accept evolution. People believe in or don't believe in God.
is sufficient, and also most evolutionary biologists today don't believe that.
Don't believe what?
They don't believe in random, so this crude fundamentalist version of random selection that you propose.
I do not propose it, and I strongly deny that evolution is random selection.
Good.
Evolution is non-random selection.
Oh,
non-random.
so there's a purpose to it, is there?
No.
He doesn't understand even the most basics of this. He really should not be on this stage at all.
Could you explain what non-random means?
Yes, of course I could. That's my life's work.
Let me just explain. This is another example of him being smug. I'm really not a fan. This is not how you win people over, okay? This is how you get people who are on your side. You give them the feeling of a win, a figurative win, not an actual win. When you're attacking somebody on the other side, it feels good to people who don't like that person. I don't like that whole smug thing, but especially because there are people in the audience who are probably completely unfamiliar with this subject. And what Dawkins just did probably turned them away from it entirely, because he's acting as a representative of the other side for, all intents and purposes. Natural selection is not random. There is a random component to gene mutation. It comes in, evolution comes in three main pillars. There's selection, the selection process, and there are a variety of different selection types. There's natural selection, there's sexual selection, there's artificial selection. I mean, there are a billion different types, right? And when those selection processes take place, gene mutation happens. When there is an exchange of genes, gene mutation takes place. So two sets of genes are melded together, and in that process, they don't meld perfectly. There is going to be some alteration, some difference, some change. We have 20,000 genes, roughly, on average, as human beings. 20,000 genes that do various different things. On average, a newborn baby has about 70 differences, 70 gene mutations. So the first pillar is the selection process. The second pillar, the gene mutation part, that's actually the third pillar. The second pillar is when genes are bound together and melded that way, there's duplication taking place. And sometimes gene duplication duplicates parts of the genetic structure that are completely superfluous. They're redundant. You have like 2 or 3 different copies of the blue eye gene. You only need one. And those mutations take place. Sometimes those mutations take place over irrelevant duplicate areas that won't affect anything, and that mutation will turn your eyes from blue to purple or yellow or green or whatever. Sometimes it's superfluous, sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's a benefit. Right now we have lactic acid that builds up in our muscles if we flex them for too long, right? Maybe there's a gene mutation that eliminates that lactic acid buildup. So people don't have lactic acid building up in their muscles when they run or jump or whatever, which means they can run and jump for a lot longer than the average person. I think Michael Phelps has that mutation, and it makes him a lot more agile. It makes him perform much better, makes him much more physically fit to engage in sports. And he is an Olympic swimmer, I believe. That's why he's so good, because of that mutation. Here's the selection part coming full circle. When he has a kid, that gene may or may not be passed on to that kid. If it is passed on, that kid will also be good at swimming really fast. Give the kid a better chance at running from lions, tigers, and bears if we lived 100,000 years ago. This is how it all played out. On occasion, those gene mutations are very, very bad, and they overwrite a gene that was not duplicated and should not be removed. And it leads to some real wild situations. Not good. Sometimes there's a gene mutation where people get more intelligent and others where people get less intelligent, Just kind of depends on the situation and what the mutation was. That's how evolution works. The people who had negative gene mutations that hurt them more than helped them are less likely to survive and flourish and build upon their lives and reproduce and everything else. The people who have good gene duplications are more likely to survive and reproduce and flourish and all that other stuff. That's how it works. So, anyways, Cardinal Pell doesn't know any of this. I would bet anything that this dude doesn't even know the most basics of it. And if that's true, he shouldn't be here. He should not be on this debate stage right now at all. Don't forget that most mutations occur in the non-coding part of the DNA. Is this not taught in the U.S., says Jimmy Neutron? No, not really. It's hit or miss. Some areas teach it, some areas don't. And if it is taught, then it's taught because it's a legal requirement and the teacher's heart is not in it. And they will simply tell you the material and move on, and that's it. They don't put any effort into explaining it or helping you understand it or anything at all. So even if it was taught to you, the vast majority of people in the U.S. don't know it. Sadly.
It's a hard thing to say, but keep it brief.
There's random genetic variation and non-random survival and a non-random reproduction, which is why, as the generations go by, animals get better at doing what they do. That is quintessentially non-random. It does not mean there's a purpose in the sense of a human purpose, in the sense of a guiding principle which is thought up in advance. With hindsight, you can say something like a bird's wing looks as though it has a purpose. A human eye looks as though it has a purpose, but it has come about through the process of non-random natural selection. There is no purpose in the human sense. There's a kind of pseudo-purpose, but it's not a purpose in the human sense of conscious guiding. But above all, I must stress that Darwinian evolution is a non-random process. And one of the biggest misunderstandings, which I'm sorry to say the Cardinals just perpetrated,
it's because the name is random selection. And it doesn't really work that way. There were a lot of little phrases and stuff that Darwin put into his book on the origin of species that have been latched onto by Christian extremists for for centuries at this point, because it was written in 1850-something, right? There are parts of it that have been latched onto by Christian extremists for centuries, and they don't understand, like, the most basic explanations of some of this stuff. Like, survival of the fittest is a very narrow explanation for a very specific set of circumstances. It's not something you want to live your life by or whatever. But anyways, let's keep listening here.
Is that evolution is a random process. It is the opposite of a random process.
A brief response to that, if you can.
Yes, that is fascinating, because
he knows that he's out of his depth here. He has to, right? A lot of these people that do the debates, a lot of the atheists that take part in the debates are terrible now. They're awful, honestly. Not a huge fan of Sam Harris. Not a fan of Richard Dawkins. Christopher Hitchens is great in a lot of ways, but again, he was in favor of the Iraq War. He was kind of conservative. There are a lot of people that I'm just not a fan of, but their contribution to the movement was still valuable and appreciated.